The screen was a beautiful, mesmerizing shade of dead blue. Not the gentle, sleepy blue of a desktop background, but the violent, neon sign blue of a system failure so complete it looked like an artistic protest. It was 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the entire HR office, the fourth busiest department in a company of 8,000 people, had just hit a wall at about 200 miles per hour. I was the only person in the entire building who wasn't surprised. I actually had to suppress a little smile. You see, for the last 7 months, my job had been to walk around this office, specifically around my team, like a highly specialized, self-aware ghost. I would watch them make a mistake, a typo on a new hire's contract, an incorrect benefits deduction code, a failure to update a security clearance, and then, under the cover of a flickering monitor or a strategically timed coffee run, I'd quietly sneak into the system and fix it. Every single one. I was the invisible thread holding the tapestry of their incompetence together. And exactly 1 week ago, I had cut that thread. The noise started as a single high-pitched squeal from Jenna, who handled onboarding. Wait, where is the W-2 template? It just vanished. Her voice, usually a cheerful, loud buzz, was laced with panic. A second later, Kevin, who managed the company's internal learning modules, let out a deep, defeated groan. My access to the benefits portal is revoked. Completely. I can't see any of the Q3 enrollment forms. He slammed his headset down. It was beautiful chaos. I sat at my desk, tucked into the far corner, near the filing cabinets that nobody ever went to, sipping my lukewarm coffee. I made sure my posture was perfect, my gaze on my own completely blank screen. I was performing the role I had been cast in, the invisible one. The manager, Lisa, a woman whose main skill was delegating work and taking credit for things she didn't understand, emerged from her glass-walled office. Her eyebrows were already pulled into a knot of professional distress. What is going on out here? Did someone spill something on the server again, Kevin? She always blamed Kevin. Poor Kevin. But this wasn't a spill. This was a structural collapse. The problem, which only I knew, was that Jenna had been using a deprecated template for new hires for weeks. Every time she used it, it created a small, corrupted entry in the main database. I'd been running a script every night to quarantine and correct those entries. Last Tuesday I'd stopped. Kevin, meanwhile, relied on a specific master code to batch process benefits forms. He had forgotten to renew that code's security certificate 3 weeks ago, a small detail which I had manually overridden daily. Last Tuesday, I let the certificate expire. And when a key employee database update came through this morning, it saw the expired cert and the corrupted entries, and the entire HR platform did what any logical system would do. It locked up and flashed the digital equivalent of an obscenity. The system essentially committed suicide to protect itself from their mistakes. It wasn't an intentional, malicious act of sabotage. It was simply me doing my job description and nothing more. My job description, which I had memorized after months of being called the ghost, didn't include cleaning up the messes of 3 highly paid colleagues who treat you like a piece of furniture. The irony was thick enough to spread on toast. They had called me invisible, and now my absence, my non-action, was the loudest thing in the office. I watched Lisa's eyes darting frantically from one colleague's panicked face to the next. She was the conductor, and her orchestra had just spontaneously combusted. She saw me for a split second, and her eyes glazed over, passing right through me. It was a reflex for her, a deep-seated habit. I wasn't an employee, I was part of the background noise. Her brain registered, desk, man irrelevant, and she moved on to interrogating Kevin about the spill. I wanted to stand up and shout, "It's not a spill, Lisa. It's an organizational aneurysm caused by neglect, incompetence, and the fact that you all thought I was so worthless you could literally wipe your boots on my invisible soul." But I didn't. I just took another sip of my coffee. The silence I was maintaining was more potent than any shout could ever be. It was the sound of a ticking bomb that had finally gone off, and I was sitting at ground zero, completely safe. Right now, if you're watching this, you probably know that feeling. That moment where you're holding everything together, but nobody sees you. They just see the finished product. I need you to drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching this video and what time it is for you. Seriously. I need to know that someone out there can actually see me. The chaos escalated. Phones started ringing off the hook. It was the IT department, the payroll office, the new hires waiting for their paperwork, the executives demanding reports. They all relied on the HR system, and now they were all stranded. My team, who were usually so quick to duck and pass the buck, were pointing fingers at the blank screens, the server, and, naturally, Kevin. The realization was dawning on them, slowly, like a sunrise over a desert of fear, that this wasn't just a technical glitch. This was big. This was a fireable offense big. And I was the only person in the room who knew how to put out the fire, and I was choosing to watch it burn. Let me rewind a little bit. To understand why I was perfectly okay watching this colossal HR system meltdown, a meltdown that was probably costing the company thousands of dollars a minute, you need to understand who Mike, the human resources fixer, really was. My job title was officially HR Systems Support Specialist, which sounds important, but in reality, I was the janitor of digital data, the guy who made sure the complex plumbing of employee documentation didn't back up and flood the entire enterprise. The setting was a busy, open-plan HR office. Imagine a room dominated by the constant click-clack of keyboards and the chirpy, over-enthusiastic phone voices of people who think they're shaping the company's future by filing paperwork. It was a space designed for collaboration, which, in practice, meant it was designed for me to be within earshot of all the problems I would eventually have to solve. We were on the second floor, a floor that somehow always smelled vaguely of burnt popcorn and too strong cologne. The view was of a parking garage, which felt appropriate. I had been there for 3 years, and from day one, I realized 2 things about this office. First, the software infrastructure was a mess, a patchwork of legacy systems held together by good intentions and terrible code. Second, my team was incredibly, almost supernaturally, disorganized. They were big-picture people. They could talk for hours about synergy and optimization and leveraging human capital, but they couldn't remember to save a file to the correct folder path to save their lives. That's where I came in. I'm an introvert. A capital I, deeply committed introvert. My ideal workday involves 0 human interaction and a complex logic puzzle to solve. The HR system was my puzzle. I wasn't interested in the office politics or the water cooler gossip. I genuinely enjoyed finding that one rogue line of code, that one corrupted database entry, or that small oversight in a benefits calculation that could blow up into a massive headache for someone later on. It gave me a quiet, private satisfaction. It was like I was a silent superhero whose superpower was preventing minor administrative errors from becoming class action lawsuits. Lisa, our manager, had hired me because she needed someone to handle the back end, and I was happy to do it. The problem was that my quiet competence quickly turned into a convenient dumping ground for everything the others didn't want to touch. There was Jenna, the bubbly onboarding specialist. She was charming, fantastic at making new hires feel welcome, and an absolute menace with a spreadsheet. She'd constantly skip mandatory fields, using my login because it was easier, which led to all sorts of messy data that I had to scrub out later. Jenna was the one who called me the ghost. It started innocently enough. One morning, she'd left her coffee cup right next to her keyboard, and when she came back, her screen was mysteriously fixed, her password was reset, and her coffee cup was gone. The ghost must have done it, she'd laughed to Kevin. The name stuck. Then there was Kevin. He was the benefits and compliance guy. Kevin was perpetually stressed, a good guy deep down, but completely overwhelmed. He used complex system functions like a blunt object, often batch processing things in a way that created more problems than it solved. Kevin was the one who accidentally excluded me from the team email distribution list for 6 months and never noticed. He literally would send out a mass email that everyone else got, and I wouldn't. When I finally asked him why I wasn't getting the team-wide memo about the upcoming training session, he just shrugged and said, "Oh, I guess I always assume you see it on the dashboard, Mike. You know, you're just kind of always there but quiet." And finally, there was Sarah. She was the HR generalist, the most senior on the team besides Lisa. Sarah was the queen of exclusion. She hosted impromptu strategy meetings at the corner table, often talking loudly about department goals, looking right past my desk. If I ever walked up to contribute a technical insight, she'd look at me like I was a disruption, not a colleague. "Thanks, Mike, but we're just talking about the big picture right now. You wouldn't want to mess with that code of yours, right?" She made my work sound like a childish hobby, not the foundational pillar of the entire operation. Sarah didn't call me the ghost. She called me the invisible barrier, because she was constantly having to ask me to move out of the way to get to the printer, even though I was clearly sitting at my desk working. This wasn't just about hurt feelings. This was about professional disregard. They didn't see my work as essential, they saw it as automatic. They were so confident that the digital structure of the HR office would just work that they never once considered the person quietly patching the leaks, tightening the screws, and ensuring the ship didn't sink. I was doing 3 people's jobs while they were doing their own, yet I wasn't invited to the team lunch, or the strategy session, or even the birthday celebration for the guy who brought in bad donuts once a month. My role, my very existence, was boiled down to a single, toxic understanding. I was a resource, not a person. I was the ghost in the machine that they could ignore until they needed a problem fixed. And after 3 years of being ignored, 3 years of having my essential contributions treated as a background hum, I realized something important. If I was a ghost, then a ghost has the freedom to just disappear. I started keeping a quiet, mental tally of every critical fix I did for them. The list was staggering. It was the physical evidence of my silent value. And one day, last Tuesday, I looked at the list, looked at my team laughing at a joke I wasn't included in, and I made a quiet, life-changing decision. The team dynamic wasn't just about exclusion, it was about the cultivation of a convenient ignorance. They didn't just ignore me, they actively fostered a work environment where they didn't have to know what I did, because they assumed it was just a technical detail beneath their pay grade. This lack of curiosity was the real insult. Take, for example, the weekly HR system status meeting. It was held every Monday at 10 a.m. I was the one who generated the status report, a complex document detailing database health, pending system updates, security audits, and projected capacity issues. I would submit it to Lisa, and then Lisa would present it to the team. Every week, like clockwork, I would wait for my invitation to the meeting. Every week, Kevin would forget to add my name to the calendar invite. Every week, I'd hover near the door, waiting for an opening to contribute my technical knowledge, the one person in the room who actually understood the backend. And every week, Sarah would look at me, purse her lips, and say, "Oh, Mike, did you need something? We're just going over the report you sent. No need to stick around." The report I sent. It was a 20-page document. Lisa would spend 3 minutes on it, mostly talking about the color coding I used, completely skipping the 2 pages I dedicated to the looming crisis around the legacy payroll interface, the one that still used an outdated, vulnerable script. I tried to warn them, in the clearest possible terms, that if the company-wide operating system updated, that payroll interface would shatter. They just smiled. "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Mike," was Lisa's favorite corporate cliché. The emotional connection I was building with them wasn't positive. It was a simmering resentment that was beginning to feel like a full-blown ethical dilemma. My internal struggle became, do I speak up and be dismissed, or do I stay silent and watch them fail? For months, my professional conscience won out, and I chose to quietly fix things. One afternoon, Jenna had a meltdown because she'd processed 50 new hire packets, and the system showed 0. 50 people were about to start their jobs without any digital record of employment. The panic was immediate and palpable. Jenna was crying, swearing she'd done everything right. I knew exactly what happened. She had been copying a script I'd written to mass upload data, but she was using an old, non-standard text editor that inserted invisible, non-printing characters into the code, rendering the whole batch file useless. I had warned her about this exact thing months ago. She was hyperventilating, begging Lisa to call IT, convinced it was a ghost in the machine, a different kind of ghost, ironically. I waited until Lisa and Jenna left the desks, ostensibly to go regroup in Lisa's office. I sat down at Jenna's terminal, and in under 3 minutes, I wrote a small, perfect macro that found all those invisible characters, stripped them out, and successfully uploaded the 50 packets. I did it so fast and so silently that when Jenna returned, the data was simply there. She shrieked with relief, ran over to me, and gave me a massive, surprising hug. "Oh my God, you saved me! How did you do that?" The IT guys would have taken days. I just shrugged, feeling a flicker of the validation I craved. "Just a quick script. Something wrong with the file encoding." Her response was the final, defining blow. She pulled back, her smile fading into a blank, unseeing look. "Oh, right, the code stuff. Thank you. You're such a lifesaver. You're like our little silent ninja." And then she turned around and spent the next hour telling Sarah and Kevin the dramatic story of her near failure and how the problem simply resolved itself. No mention of the silent ninja who had saved her job. That's when I realized the problem wasn't their lack of appreciation, it was their willful blindness. They didn't want to know how I fixed it, because knowing would require them to admit two things. First, that their fundamental work processes were flawed, and second, that they were entirely dependent on the person they treated like office furniture. They had constructed this elaborate, comfortable reality where they were the strategic thinkers and I was the magical entity who prevented bad things from happening. My existence was a paradox to them, a critical, indispensable system administrator who was somehow also completely irrelevant as a human being. The internal conflict I felt went from professional duty to existential crisis. I started to see myself through their eyes. A desk, a keyboard, a quick fix, and then back to being a ghost. They had successfully erased my personality, my input, and my professional worth. They had called me invisible, and by doing so, they had given me the perfect cover. I remember thinking, sitting there in the buzzing, bright HR office, watching them all high-fiving over a system that only worked because of my secret, ongoing labor. What happens when the invisible barrier decides to step aside? I pictured a ripple effect. One missing file, then two, then a corrupted database, then the whole system implodes. It wouldn't be malicious, it would be a simple, beautiful demonstration of cause and effect. They created the instability, I simply stopped neutralizing it. And the idea, the sheer, beautiful, terrifying justice of it, took root in my mind and began to grow. It wasn't about revenge, it was about forcing them to see the truth, even if it was through the lens of a disaster. The problem wasn't static, it was escalating. The deeper the team leaned into their convenient ignorance, the more my isolation became a structured, almost official part of the office culture. They weren't just neglecting me, they were building systems around my presumed absence. This deliberate, daily exclusion began to bleed into the technical side of my job, turning the layered conflict into a professional emergency that only I could see brewing. The real trigger was a new project management software Lisa implemented. It was supposed to be a collaborative tool, a place for all of us to track our progress, share files, and hold each other accountable. In reality, it became another way for them to draw a line around the visible and invisible people. When Lisa set up the team on the new platform, she made sure everyone had a profile, access to the group chat, and assigned tasks, everyone, that is, except me. "Mike doesn't need a profile," Sarah told Kevin one afternoon, loudly enough for me to hear while I was actually troubleshooting a minor network issue at a nearby terminal. "His work is all background stuff. He just does the code. It doesn't need to be tracked in a collaborative space." "Yeah, plus, if he's not in the chat, we don't have to worry about accidentally bothering him with our day-to-day stuff," Jenna chimed in, reinforcing the idea that my work was so specialized and delicate that I should be cordoned off, like a sensitive server in a separate room. So, I was officially excluded from the very tool designed to facilitate teamwork. All the project details, the new deadlines, the shifting priorities, it was all discussed and documented in a system I didn't have access to. I had to rely on overheard snippets of conversation and my own intuition to figure out what new, messy situations they were creating for me to clean up later. This didn't just hurt my feelings, though it certainly did that, it created a massive communication gap. For example, they decided, in a long chat thread I couldn't read, to suddenly change the naming convention for all new employee files. A logical change, perhaps, but one that required a simple 4-line patch to the automated data ingestion script I maintained. Because I wasn't consulted or even informed, I didn't make the patch. For 3 days, every single file they uploaded under the new, improved, naming convention was being rejected by the system because it didn't match the required parameters. The files were piling up in the quarantine folder, waiting for me to magically notice and fix it. When Kevin finally noticed the growing number of files in the folder and came over to my desk, he was frustrated. "Mike, why are all these files quarantined? You need to fix this filter. It's blocking our new naming convention. We need these reports immediately." He didn't ask me what was wrong. He told me to fix my filter, placing the blame squarely on my code. I calmly looked up from my screen, maintaining eye contact. "I wasn't aware of a new naming convention, Kevin. That script is designed to adhere to the existing company standard." He blinked at me, genuinely confused. It was in the PM chat. "Sarah sent out the new protocol on Monday. You just need to update your script." "I don't have access to the PM software, Kevin," I stated plainly. The look on his face was a mix of confusion and annoyance, not apology. "Oh, right. Well, can you just get the update from Sarah, then? We're on a deadline here, Mike." He didn't understand the depth of the issue. The real issue wasn't the 4 lines of code, it was the entire framework of assumptions that led to this moment. They had excluded me from communication, introduced a critical change, blamed me for the resulting failure, and then treated my lack of knowledge as a minor inconvenience that I had to remedy by chasing them for information. The emotional stakes were rising sharply. This wasn't just about feeling unappreciated, it was about feeling actively disrespected and marginalized to the point where my professional competence was being undermined by their social structures. I was no longer a silent contributor, I was becoming a necessary scapegoat. If things went wrong, it would be my filter that was broken, not their communication. This realization, that my quiet hard work was actually enabling their poor behavior and shielding them from accountability, was the final straw. They needed to feel the consequences of treating their foundation like it was indestructible. The secondary challenge wasn't just fixing their errors, it was fixing their mindset. And the only way to do that was to remove the safety net completely. That evening, as I was shutting down my workstation, I reviewed the quarantine folder. Hundreds of files. Weeks of mistakes, big and small, were waiting for my attention. The expired security certificate, Jenna's corrupted templates, the file naming convention errors. It was all there. I could have fixed it all in an hour. Instead, I opened the system administration console and, with a few quiet keystrokes, I disabled the automated error correction script. I didn't delete the files or corrupt anything. I simply told the system, when an error occurs, do not attempt to mitigate or correct it. Let the error stand. Report it, but take no action. I stopped being their invisible, unpaid risk management consultant. I was going to let the mistakes accumulate, like snow piling up on a fragile roof, until the sheer weight of their collective negligence brought the whole structure down. The experiment had begun. They called me invisible, so I was about to disappear into the quiet competence of only doing the bare minimum of my specified job description, leaving the rest to their capable, yet oblivious, hands. The decision to stop fixing their mistakes wasn't a snap judgment born of anger. It was a quiet, cold calculation, a professional divorce from the over and above effort I had been providing for years. It was the moment I chose self-preservation over unsolicited assistance. They called me invisible, a ghost, and my disappearance was going to be the logical consequence of their perception. The following morning, a full week before the ultimate crash, felt bizarrely normal. I sat at my desk, still in my quiet corner, and watched the usual morning routine unfold. Jenna was cheerfully chatting about her weekend. Kevin was frantically trying to troubleshoot an issue with his login credentials, a simple caps lock error, which I had always just told him over the cube wall, and Sarah was sipping a massive latte, critiquing the font choice on a department-wide memo. Life was proceeding as usual, completely ignorant of the ticking time bomb I had just armed and placed under the foundation of their work. The first few errors were small, almost microscopic. Jenna tried to process a bulk payment request for a temporary contractor. The old template she was using, the one with the hidden corruption, created a data entry error. In the past, my script would have flagged it, sanitized the entry, and processed the payment within milliseconds. Today, the system flagged the error and, following my new, strict command, simply halted the process and created a hard, internal error log. Jenna saw a small, red message on her screen. Process aborted, data integrity violation, code 103. She frowned, sighed heavily, and called out, "Hey Kevin, you ever seen a code 103? I think the system's being weird again." Kevin, immersed in his own minor crisis, grumbled, "Just clear the cache, Jenna." "Mike, you seeing any network latency this morning?" He reflexively included me in the technical question, as if my role was to provide the atmosphere report for the office's digital weather. I looked up, meeting his eyes calmly. "No, Kevin. Network latency is nominal. That's a data integrity issue on the application layer." I deliberately used the precise, technical language I knew they hated and barely understood. It was a subtle signal, a tiny, professional boundary being erected, and it flew right over his head. Jenna followed Kevin's terrible advice and cleared her cache. The problem, of course, was the corrupted file, not her cache. She tried again. Same error. She tried a third time. Now, because she had forced the transaction multiple times, the system, trying to prevent further corruption, temporarily locked her out of the payment module. Instead of panicking, Jenna decided it was a server issue and simply put the task on her to-do list for later. This was a common behavior, deferring the problem until the invisible one magically solved it. This time, though, there would be no magic. That contractor's payment would sit, unprocessed, gathering metaphorical dust. The errors began to compound. Sarah, working on a major quarterly compliance report, needed to pull data from a legacy database. I had consistently warned Lisa that this specific data pull required a special, manual query because the database structures weren't aligned. I had always run that query for her. Today, Sarah ran the automated report pull. The system, finding mismatched data types, didn't flag an error to the user. Instead, it did something far more insidious. It returned incomplete and silently inaccurate data. Sarah was happily compiling her compliance report with what she thought was correct data. The report, which would go straight to the executive committee, was now fundamentally flawed. Because the system hadn't crashed, there was no visible crisis, just a slow, quiet poisoning of the company's vital information stream. I watched all this, my hands resting on my keyboard, looking like I was engrossed in my own background stuff. Every fiber of my being, the Mike who was professionally meticulous, was screaming to reach out, to type the correct query, to delete Jenna's corrupted template. But I held back. I remembered the 100 times they had talked over me, the 6 months I was off the email list, the countless times they had called me a ghost. My emotional state was a strange mix of profound calm and terrifying anticipation. It felt like I was standing on a bluff, watching a perfectly beautiful tsunami approach the coastline. I wasn't creating the waves, I was just refusing to build the seawall. I even had a close call. Lisa walked past my desk, phone plastered to her ear, mid-conversation about a high-priority meeting. She dropped a small, handwritten post-it note right next to my mousepad. It had a single, complex string of characters on it. I immediately recognized it, the administrator password for a critical, newly installed piece of HR software. She had accidentally written it down and dropped it. A major security breach waiting to happen. In the past, I would have discreetly picked it up, handed it to her, and reminded her about the company's password security policy. I would have been the invisible savior of network integrity. This time, I kept my hands on my keyboard. I shifted my chair slightly so the post-it was tucked just out of sight of anyone passing by. I continued to work on my perfectly legitimate, low-priority, mic-only tasks. I had to let the mistake stand. That was the contract I had made with myself. Lisa didn't even remember dropping it. The physical evidence of her carelessness was sitting inches from my hand, and I let it remain there, a testament to the carelessness they all exhibited. I was disappearing, and the first stage of my vanishing act was a perfect, unmoving stillness. The subtle absence of my automated cleanup, the act of just letting things be, began to register not as a system fault, but as a series of strange, frustrating inconveniences for my team. The ship wasn't sinking yet, but the bilge pumps had been quietly turned off, and the lower decks were starting to get wet. This was the period of the first cracks, the small moments of confusion that only I could connect to the larger, looming disaster. Remember the contractor payment Jenna couldn't process? 2 days later, the contractor called. Not the company, but Jenna's direct extension. They were politely demanding their payment and threatening to call the corporate legal department. Jenna, true to form, panicked and ran to Lisa, blaming the glitchy system. I watched Lisa get involved. She went to the payment module, tried to push the transaction through herself, and immediately got the same data integrity violation, code 103. Now it was an executive problem. Lisa's solution? Not to investigate the error code or the data source, but to call a mid-level IT desk technician and try to strong-arm them into manually overriding the system lock. The technician, a young guy named Alex who followed the rules, pushed back. Ms. Hayes, the system is locking that user out for a reason. It's protecting the data. A code 103 means the file is corrupted. We can't override it. You need to identify the corrupting file and manually clean the queue. This was the key, the clean the queue part. That was my job. A job they never saw. Lisa huffed, annoyed that the IT department wasn't bowing to her authority. It's absurd. Mike, can you just look at what Alex said? Clean the queue. Can you run one of your little scripts? It was the first time in 2 days Lisa had directly addressed me with a task that she knew was related to my expertise. But she phrased it as a menial favor, not an essential requirement. I put down my pen and walked over, leaning over her shoulder to look at the error log. The corruption stems from using a deprecated input template, Lisa. It's not in the queue, it's in the source file Jenna used. It's created a cumulative error. It would be faster for Jenna to manually re-enter the data using the current template. Lisa waved her hand dismissively. No, we don't have time for that. Just run the script. You have a script for everything, right, Mike? This was my moment to solidify my new policy. I looked at her, entirely serious. I have scripts to prevent errors, Lisa, and to correct my own errors. Running a large-scale data sanitation on a system with live transactions for a problem caused by incorrect user behavior is outside my current scope of work for this quarter. I'd be happy to write a proposal for a team training session on correct template usage, though. The sudden, formal language and the refusal were like cold water on her face. She was so used to me saying, "Sure, I'll take care of it," that my professional boundary felt like outright insubordination. "You're telling me you won't fix the broken payment system?" she said, her voice dangerously low. "I'm telling you that the process is broken, and a temporary software patch won't fix the underlying human error. I am an HR systems support specialist, not a data janitor. Re-enter the data manually, Lisa. That's the only clean fix," I said, and then I turned and walked back to my desk, the air thick with tension. Jenna and Kevin were staring. They had never seen me directly push back on Lisa. The issue was eventually resolved when Lisa, after an hour of fuming, forced Kevin to manually re-enter the payment information. Kevin was furious, but he took it out on the stupid, glitchy system, not on me. My refusal was noted, but misinterpreted as Mike having a bad day or being difficult. They failed to connect my refusal to the ongoing system failure. Meanwhile, Sarah's compliance report, which was silently full of inaccurate data from my uncorrected query, got sent to the executive team. The next day, the head of finance, a very powerful man known for his short temper, sent an email that simply read, "This data is garbage. Rework and resend within 48 hours. What is HR doing?" Sarah was in a frenzy. She couldn't understand why the data was wrong. She went into the system, ran the report again, and got the same garbage data. She stomped over to my desk, her face red. "Mike, you have to look at this. The system is pulling the wrong numbers for Q3 personnel costs. Is the database having a wobble?" I looked at the screen she thrust at me. I could see the error immediately. It was the legacy data mismatch. but I held firm. That report relies on two different database structures, Sarah. Did you follow the legacy data extraction protocol? It's a multi-step manual process to ensure clean data transfer. Protocol? I just hit generate report, Mike. It's always worked fine, she spat out. It works fine when the data is aligned, Sarah. If the systems aren't communicating cleanly, the report will be unreliable. Check the extraction log. It will show the data mismatch, I replied, the most unhelpful, technically accurate response possible. I didn't mention the special manual query I had always run for her. I forced her to confront the complexity she had always ignored. She walked away muttering about technical jargon and unhelpful people. The cracks were widening. Payments were delayed, reports were inaccurate, and the team was burning time on problems that, in the past, would have been silently fixed before they even noticed. They still hadn't seen the real enemy, their own negligence. They only saw a suddenly temperamental system and a newly uncooperative ghost. They were becoming dependent on my past, unacknowledged labor, and now that labor was gone, they were flailing. The progression from minor cracks to the systemic meltdown looming was frighteningly fast, like watching a tiny leak in a dam suddenly become a torrent. It only took 4 more days after I started my disappearance for the system to pass the point of no return. My team, blinded by their tunnel vision and insistence on blaming external factors, were still treating these catastrophic failures as annoying glitches. Kevin was next on the chopping block, entirely unknowingly. Remember that expired security certificate for the master code he used to batch process benefits forms? I had been manually overriding the expired status daily for weeks. Since I stopped, the certificate had been officially revoked by the overarching network security system. The immediate consequence wasn't a sudden explosion, it was a slow, agonizing death of data access. Kevin tried to run the weekly benefits update, a simple process that moved employee deductions from the HR system to the payroll system. He got a new error, access denied, administrative clearance revoked. He stared at the screen, bewildered. He went to Lisa. My admin privileges are gone. I can't process the benefits update. This is going to hold up payroll for over 200 people. Lisa, already stressed from the finance team's demand for Sarah's fixed report, called the IT help desk for the 3rd time that day. This time, she got the department supervisor, a stern woman named Carol. Ms. Hayes, Carol's voice crackled through the speakerphone, audible to everyone. Your employee's access was revoked because the security certificate for his master code expired 3 weeks ago. It was flagged multiple times. We sent an automated notification to your department manager, every single day for 3 weeks. Why was this not renewed? Lisa visibly paled. She looked over at Kevin, whose jaw had dropped. A notification? I don't recall seeing that, Carol. It must have gone to the wrong folder or something. Can you just, reissue it? Just for today. Carol's tone was glacial. No. That master code is critical infrastructure. To renew it, your employee has to submit a formal request with a department head sign-off, a 2-factor verification, and a mandatory security awareness training. That will take at least 48 hours to process through the security protocol. 48 hours. 200 people about to miss a paycheck. The chaos was intensifying. Lisa shot a venomous look at Kevin, who immediately tried to pass the blame. But I thought Mike handled all the back-end certificates. He's the systems guy. All eyes turned to me. I was sitting at my desk, calmly typing a non-critical technical memo. I looked up, surprised, and shook my head slightly. The master code certificate for benefits processing is an administrative function tied directly to the benefits specialist's account. It falls under user management and compliance, not core system support. Another technically accurate, perfectly unhelpful truth. I was forcing them to own their responsibilities. Meanwhile, Jenna's earlier corruption had metastasized. Remember how she kept trying to force that corrupted payment through locking down the payment module? Well, those multiple forced errors had triggered an internal security protocol that began a mandatory system-wide database rollback. The system was attempting to undo what it perceived as a threat, The cumulative result of Jenna's errors and Sarah's bad file paths. I, the only one with the technical foresight, knew what a database rollback meant in our environment. All data input since the last verified clean backup was about to be wiped out. Our last verified clean backup was over a week old, before my disappearance. I watched the clock tick down on the internal system dashboard. I could see the status bar for the rollback. It was at 78%. I knew exactly which script I needed to run to abort the rollback, to save a week's worth of new employee data, contract updates, and benefits changes. The script was simple, a few lines of code. It would take me 90 seconds. I folded my hands in my lap. I looked at Jenna, who was currently watching a cat video on her phone to de-stress from the contractor issue. I looked at Lisa, who was screaming, whispering into the phone at Carol in IT. I looked at Kevin, who was frantically filling out a 5-page form to get his access back. They were all still operating under the assumption that the system, at its core, was benevolent and would eventually right itself, or that someone else, IT, the ghost, would save them. The moral dilemma was a sharp jab in my gut. Hundreds of people would be negatively impacted by this. But the system was their system. The neglect was their neglect. My job description was system support, but my dignity was forcing me to maintain my position. I only fix what I broke, and I broke nothing. The screen on the system dashboard blinked. Rollback 100% complete. System integrity restored. The system had just wiped clean all the new data from the past week, erasing 50 new hires, a dozen termination records, and all the Q4 planning documents. It was the ultimate, systemic self-correction to months of user error, and it was the prelude to the final collapse. I looked at the serene, newly reset screens of my colleagues. They had no idea that they had just lost a week of work. They thought the system was stable because the error messages had stopped. The calm before the storm was terrifying. I knew that the minute someone tried to look up a new employee or access a recent document, the whole office would erupt. I reached for my coffee, waiting for the silence to shatter. The crash and chaos didn't start with a bang. It started with the quiet click of a mouse and a sound of confused disbelief. The database rollback, which I had silently allowed to happen, had restored the HR system to a state a week prior, erasing all recent work. My team didn't know it, but they were about to discover they were standing on quicksand. The first person to notice was Jenna. She finally decided to follow through on an email from a newly hired employee, a top-tier software engineer, who was asking where his benefits package enrollment link was. Jenna went to the onboarding portal to check his status. The system responded, "Employee ID not found. Record does not exist." Jenna frowned, typed in the name again. "Record does not exist." "What the heck?" she muttered, pulling up her recent file log. The file was there on her desktop, the correct filled-out form, but the system had no memory of it. She tried to check the corporate directory. The new software engineer was gone. Vanished. She stood up, slowly, her eyes wide, and walked over to Sarah. "Sarah, you know how we onboard Alex, the new senior dev, last week? He's not in the system. I mean, he's completely not in the system. Like he never applied." Sarah, who was already dealing with the aftermath of her garbage report, sighed, annoyed. "Jenna, don't be ridiculous. I saw his file. It's just a glitch." She tried to look up the same new hire on her terminal. Same result. Record does not exist. The alarm bells started ringing faster now. Kevin tried to check on the benefits of another new employee he had processed just 4 days ago. The system showed the employee's status as pending, but the hire date was marked as 10 days ago. The data was scrambled and missing. The database rollback had created an alternate, highly broken reality. Within minutes, the whole OpenPlan office devolved into pure, unadulterated panic. "My entire week of termination reports is gone," Sarah shrieked, clutching her head. "The data on the recent layoffs. We need that for the legal review. Where did it go? The Q4 hiring pipeline I just finalized? It's completely reverted to the preliminary list from last month." Jenna cried, her voice rising to a frantic pitch. 50 new hires were now in limbo, And 50 recent terminations were about to get unexpected paychecks and reactivated system access. The potential for legal and financial disaster was immense. The phone started ringing, not just the IT help desk, but the executive lines. The head of operations called Lisa, demanding to know why the 50 employees who started on Monday suddenly didn't have active security badges or logins. The head of payroll called, asking why the payroll system was flagging 200 employees with incomplete benefits deductions, meaning their paychecks would be wrong. This wasn't just internal chaos. This was an earthquake felt across the entire company. Lisa finally emerged from her office, not with her usual professional mask, but with genuine, raw terror etched onto her face. What is the status? Someone tell me what in God's name happened to the HR master database. My team, who had spent the last week ignoring the mounting red flags, could only offer confused, finger-pointing answers. Jenna, it was that code 103. It must have corrupted everything. Kevin, it's the security certificate. IT locked us out and it broke the data link. Sarah, it was the report filter. The whole system is completely unstable. None of them were looking at the true, single cause. The collective, uncorrected mistakes of the past week, which I had allowed to reach their logical conclusion. They were blaming symptoms, not the disease. Lisa, completely overwhelmed, slammed her hands on the nearest desk. It happened to be Kevin's. Stop. Just stop with the excuses. We have a company-wide crisis. Someone needs to find the root cause now. Who understands the system's backend? She looked around the room, her eyes desperately scanning for a solution. She saw Jenna crying. She saw Kevin sweating. She saw Sarah furiously hitting refresh on a useless screen. And then her eyes settled on my corner. My quiet, invisible corner. I was sitting there, calm, watching the show, looking utterly serene amidst the storm. It was the only place in the office that felt like a sanctuary. Lisa rushed over to me, her composure completely gone. She practically grabbed my arm. Mike, you're the systems guy. You see the error logs. You understand the code. What is happening? Why did the database roll back? Can you stop it? She was no longer asking for a favor. She was begging for a lifeline. The realization had hit her that the person she treated like an afterthought was suddenly the single most important individual in the department. I slowly looked up at her, my expression unreadable. I took a deliberate sip of my coffee, savoring the moment of absolute, unassailable control. The system didn't roll back without a reason, Lisa, I said, my voice low and steady against the background clamor. A sustained series of high-level data integrity violations, combined with several administrator access failures, triggered a mandatory security rollback protocol. It's a feature, not a bug. It's the system protecting itself from user error. Can you undo it? Can you restore the week's data? She pleaded, her eyes fixed on mine. I paused, letting the silence stretch, forcing her to fully comprehend the weight of the moment. I can, I finally said. I can restore the data and fix the core issues. But there's a problem, Lisa. A really big one. I wasn't going to fix anything until they truly acknowledged the invisible man. Lisa's face was a mask of pure desperation. She was hanging on to my every word, completely forgetting her usual dismissive attitude. My colleagues, Jenna, Kevin, and Sarah, had also gathered near my desk, their eyes fixed on me like I was a mystical oracle who held the key to their professional survival. Management's desperate search had ended right here, in the quiet corner, at the desk of the man they called the Ghost. A problem? Mike, what problem? Lisa's voice was strained, bordering on a whine. Tell me. I don't care what it costs, or what you need. Just tell me how to fix this. The head of operations is calling every 15 minutes. I slowly stood up, my movement deliberate, forcing them all to look up at me. This was the first time in 3 years I had stood over Lisa, rather than leaning over her shoulder to discreetly fix one of her mistakes. The problem, Lisa, I began, speaking clearly and calmly, is that the process to restore that data requires access to a master recovery key that I was never given. I watched their expressions cycle through confusion, disbelief, and then a dawning horror. Never given? Why not? She stammered. Because, I continued, when the IT department implemented the new security protocols 3 months ago, they designated the key holder as the primary HR systems administrator. They held a mandatory 2-hour training session on the new protocols and key management. The primary administrator had to be present to receive the key and sign the chain of custody document. I paused, then looked directly at Sarah. The invitation for that training was sent out on a team distribution list. The one I was never on. Kevin's oversight, remember? Kevin shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. When I realized I was excluded, I went on. I sent Lisa a brief internal memo, asking to be included, stating the importance of my role in systems recovery. I remember the exact reply. I looked at Lisa, who was visibly shaking. You replied, Mike, we're all very busy with actual HR strategy right now. Just ask Sarah for the notes if you need them. It's probably just a formality anyway. Sarah piped up defensively, I didn't even go to the whole thing. It was so boring. I just assumed the key was online somewhere. It's not online, Sarah, I explained, the patience in my voice making the severity of the situation even colder. It was a physical encryption device, a USB drive that holds the only temporary override code for the rollback. And it was handed over to the person who did attend the entire session, Jenna. Jenna's mouth fell open. Me? But I was on the phone the whole time. I was doing new hire interviews. I remember the guy giving me a tiny USB stick, but I thought it was just a free company lanyard or something. I put it in my desk drawer. Why didn't anyone tell me what it was? Because, I said, my gaze sweeping across all 3 of them, none of you ever bothered to ask me what my job actually entailed, what systems I was supporting, or why I was asking to be included in that training. You all assumed it was background stuff. You delegated the task of system administration to me, but you never delegated the authority or the critical information. Lisa threw her hands up in exasperation, but a desperate, calculating look had replaced her fear. Okay, fine. That was a mistake. A huge mistake. But Jenna, get the USB. We need to stop this. Mike, if you can fix this, you will be rewarded. The bonus. A massive promotion. Whatever you want. This was the opening. The moment of maximum leverage. The knife edge of the turning point. I appreciate the belated offer of a bonus, Lisa, I said, crossing my arms. But a bonus won't undo 3 years of being called the ghost and being systematically excluded from my own department. It won't fix the fact that my professional role was reduced to that of an invisible janitor cleaning up messes you all didn't care enough to prevent. I gestured to the panicked office. What you are seeing right now, this collapse, this isn't a glitch. This is the natural, inevitable consequence of running a critical department on a foundation of willful ignorance and professional disrespect. This is the moment the invisible one stopped fixing the problem and let the real failure, the failure of communication and respect, become visible to everyone. The air was electric. My team looked devastated, not because they were worried about the data, but because they were suddenly confronted with the raw, undeniable truth of their own behavior. I can fix it, I reiterated, but not for a bonus. I have conditions, Lisa. Conditions that address the root cause of the problem. My voice never wavered. I was no longer the quiet ghost. I was the essential pillar, demanding recognition. I had their full, terrified, and utterly compliant attention. I had disappeared, and now, they needed to pay the price of my reappearance. The rising drama was reaching its crescendo, and the power dynamic in the HR office had fundamentally, violently shifted. The silence that followed my statement, the refusal to move until my terms were met, was heavier than the roar of the earlier panic. The realization of value was settling over the room like a cold, hard fog. Lisa, the master of corporate control, was now utterly helpless, reliant entirely on the goodwill of the person she had professionally erased. Conditions? Lisa repeated, her voice a croak. What conditions, Mike? Just tell me. You want a raise? 10%? 20? I shook my head slowly. It's not about money right now, Lisa. It's about respect. It's about the fundamental structure of this team. I looked at Jenna, who was nervously fiddling with her phone, which contained the one item that could save all their jobs. Jenna, that USB drive. That's the only key to restoring a week's worth of company data. It's an asset worth millions of dollars in lost productivity and legal exposure. Yet, you treated it like a promotional trinket. Jenna looked genuinely mortified. I just didn't know, Mike. Nobody told me it was important. I swear. Exactly, I said, turning back to Lisa. My first condition is non-negotiable and immediate. I am the primary HR systems administrator. That title must be officially recognized, effective immediately. I must have direct report access to IT for all high-level security matters, bypassing this department's chain of command when necessary. My expertise is no longer background stuff. It is the frontline defense, and I need the authority to match that. Lisa nodded frantically. Done. Absolutely. We can put the paperwork in as soon as the system is up. You'll report directly to the head of IT as well, if that's what you want. It starts now, I countered. You will draft an internal, company-wide memo, right now, stating that the system failure was caused by a breakdown in administrative communication and system authority, and that I have been granted the authority to stabilize and reconstruct the department's data flow. I want my name on that memo, and I want it sent to every department head immediately. No obfuscation. No blaming glitches. Sarah gasped. You want to throw us under the bus? I looked at Sarah, whose inaccurate report was still lurking in the system, waiting to cause more damage. I want accountability, Sarah. The system didn't break. The team broke it. And if I am to prevent this from happening again, the entire organization needs to know why it happened. This isn't about punishment. It's about forcing visibility and acknowledging the true cost of neglect. I moved to my second condition, looking directly at Kevin. My second condition is about inclusion. Effective immediately, I am to be included in every single meeting, every single email chain, and every single project management chat that involves the processing, storage, or reporting of employee data. No exceptions. If I am excluded, I will consider it a professional obstruction, and I will escalate the matter immediately to the newly established IT liaison. Kevin swallowed hard, his face a picture of shame. Mike, I am so sorry about that email list. I honestly didn't realize for so long. Apology accepted, Kevin. But the rule stands. My inclusion is non-negotiable because your non-communication is a direct threat to the company's data integrity. The third condition was the most difficult for them to swallow because it was deeply personal. I looked at all three of my colleagues, my voice softening slightly, but losing none of its steel. My final condition is about respect. The names stop. The ghost, invisible barrier, little silent ninja. They stop now. You will treat me as an indispensable, high-value colleague. My work will be acknowledged in team meetings, and my technical counsel will be sought and respected before major data decisions are made. I paused, letting the weight of the last 3 years settle on them. This isn't about forcing you to be my friend. It's about establishing a professional environment where I am recognized as a person and an expert, not a piece of background utility. If I hear those names again, or if my counsel is ignored leading to another failure, I will document it. And I will walk away. Lisa nodded vehemently. Mike, I promise you. Everything. We will change the whole structure of the department. Just tell Jenna to get the USB. Please. I held up a hand. I need one more thing. I need your commitment to a full, week-long shutdown of all non-essential data processing. We can't simply rush a fix. We need to analyze the full extent of the data corruption caused by the past week's errors, implement the patch, and then slowly and manually reprocess the lost data. I need your team, my team, to follow my exact, tedious, step-by-step instructions for the next 5 days to ensure data integrity. No rushing. No shortcuts. This meant they would be doing the incredibly boring, detailed work they had always avoided. It was the penance for their big-picture negligence. I was forcing the visible people to do the invisible work. Lisa didn't even hesitate. Consider it done. We're on your time. We'll do exactly what you say. I gave a curt nod. But, Jenna, retrieve the drive. I'll start writing the patch. And Lisa, you start drafting that memo. Right now. The invisible man had finally spoken, and his word was law. The entire office, humbled and terrified, immediately sprang into action, doing exactly what I commanded. The disaster they created was now mine to fix, but this time, it was on my terms, and they were forced to see the value they had almost destroyed. The immediate task was a whirlwind of controlled, meticulous effort, but the most dramatic part was watching my former tormentors transform into compliant, hyper-focused subordinates. Jenna retrieved the tiny, innocuous-looking USB drive from her messy desk drawer, her hand trembling slightly as she handed over the key to the company's stability. I took it, and for the first time, I felt the weight of their total reliance on me, but this time, it was a source of power, not an invisible burden. I spent the next 2 hours in a state of flow, completely ignoring the noise, writing the complex emergency patch that would stabilize the system and prepare the environment for data restoration. I ran a comprehensive diagnostic, and as promised, I found the complete audit log that detailed every error that had piled up over the week: Jenna's corruption, Kevin's access lapse, Sarah's misaligned reports, all clearly marked with timestamps and user IDs. It was the perfect, irrefutable evidence of their negligence. While I worked on the code, Lisa was fulfilling her part of the agreement. I heard her on the phone with the head of IT, Carol, formally requesting the immediate promotion and authority change. Then she opened her email and, with a grim look of resignation, drafted the company-wide memo. When she finished, she walked over to me, holding her laptop out. "Here it is, just as you requested." The memo was surprisingly direct. The subject line read, "Critical HR systems failure, root cause and new leadership mandate." The body of the memo explicitly stated that the failure was not a technical glitch but was the result of a severe internal communication and administrative authority breakdown within the HR team. It named me, Mike, and announced my new title, Primary HR Systems Administrator, with direct escalation authority to IT leadership. It emphasized that all HR personnel were now required to follow my specific protocols to ensure successful system recovery. It was a formal, undeniable acknowledgement of my importance and a public confirmation of their error. "Send it," I instructed, not taking my eyes off the patch I was compiling. She hesitated for a split second, then pressed send. The damage to her own reputation was likely severe, but the fear of losing her job entirely, which the system crash had ensured, was clearly the stronger motivator. The next 5 days were the most surreal experience of my professional life. It was the forced penance I had designed. I had all 3 of them, Lisa, Jenna, Kevin, and Sarah, working under my direct command. I was not coding. I was managing a meticulous, manual, data reconstruction effort. I forced Kevin to sit next to me and, page by agonizing page, manually reconcile the 200 payroll benefits forms he had let lapse, using my specialized terminal access under my supervision. He had to cross-reference the old and new data, line by line. It took him 2 full days. He learned, in the most painful way possible, the exact process he had relied on me to silently execute. I made Jenna and Sarah work together on re-entering all the lost new hire and termination data. Because of Jenna's earlier corrupted file, I made them input the data using an old, validated terminal interface. A slow, command line process that made them appreciate the convenience of the graphical user interface they had always taken for granted. They had to talk to each other, cross-checking every field, forcing the communication and collaboration that had been absent for years. They couldn't be big-picture people anymore. They had to focus on every single, invisible detail. I never raised my voice, never rubbed their faces in their mistakes. I was simply precise, professional, and utterly unyielding on the quality of the work. If a single data point was off, I made them restart the entire batch. They were exhausted, humbled, and focused. The entire office, seeing the HR team working on basic data entry with the urgency of bomb defusal, understood the gravity of the situation. The invisible work was finally visible. On the 5th day, I ran the final audit. The system was clean, stable, and the lost data was fully restored with 100% integrity. The system didn't just work, it worked better than it had before, because the users were now trained, meticulous, and terrified of making a mistake. Lisa called the executive committee. I was on the speakerphone. The head of operations praised my extraordinary performance under pressure and confirmed my new role and authority. It was everything I had demanded. I had not only saved the department, but I had fundamentally restructured my professional environment from the ground up. My colleagues looked at me differently now. Jenna didn't call me ninja. She asked, "Mike, can you review this template for me before I process it?" Sarah asked me for technical input before sending any major report. The ghost had finally forced them to see him, not through fear, but through the overwhelming, undeniable proof of his indispensable value. The week following the data restoration was the period of the new normal. The office environment had changed so radically it felt like I'd been transferred to a different company. The low, simmering hum of disrespect and exclusion was gone, replaced by a strange, quiet professionalism bordering on deference. Lisa held a department-wide meeting on the following Monday, not in her office, but in the main conference room with the door wide open. It wasn't to discuss HR strategy, it was an hour-long session I led on data integrity best practices. I made my team, including Lisa, take notes. I wasn't teaching them code, I was teaching them respect for the data, which was a proxy for respect for my work. My 3 colleagues, the people who had called me invisible, were now my most attentive students. Jenna, who used to joke about me being a silent ninja, came to my desk afterward and, with a genuine look of humility, asked if I could set up a macro on her system that would auto-validate her templates before she processed them. She was proactively seeking to prevent the very error I had allowed to burn the department down. Sarah, the former queen of the big picture, now meticulously checked her file path conventions and, before pulling any major report, would send me an email with the query I should run, simply asking, "Mike, is this the most efficient and correct way to pull this data now, or should I wait for your input?" She was acknowledging that the foundation was more important than the presentation. Kevin, who had been the most shamefaced about the email exclusion, was almost pathologically polite. He even started bringing me my coffee exactly how I liked it, black, no sugar, and made sure I was not only on every email distribution list, but often CC'd me on emails that had nothing to do with my work, just to prove I was included. The office was quiet, efficient, and, for the first time, collaborative. My corner desk, once a symbol of isolation, had become the department's central node. People approached me with questions and requests, not dismissive demands. They looked me in the eye when they spoke to me. I had achieved the professional recognition I craved, not by shouting about my value, but by quietly demonstrating the catastrophic cost of my absence. They called me invisible, and by disappearing, I had forced them to see. My new status wasn't just internal. I now had weekly one-on-one meetings with Carol, the head of IT, who treated me with the utmost respect. We discussed system architecture and long-term security strategies. My professional life had soared from background noise to front and center critical infrastructure planning. But the story doesn't end with a simple happily ever after, because human nature is messy. Even with all the professional success, the raises, the authority, and the respect, there's a lingering, thought-provoking question that sits with me even now. I remember one afternoon, about a month into the new normal. Lisa called me into her office to review my new salary and promotion package. It was an impressive offer, more than covering the years of undervalued labor. "Mike," she said, leaning forward earnestly, "I know we made a terrible mistake. We were so focused on the visible metrics, the people-facing side of HR, that we completely took the system and your work for granted. I've told the rest of the management team this was a huge learning moment. We value you now. Truly." I looked at her, and I knew she meant it, at least in that moment. The fear of another system crash was a very powerful motivator. "Thank you, Lisa," I replied. "I appreciate the acknowledgement." She smiled, a genuine, relieved smile. "You know," she said with a slight, nervous laugh, "it's funny. You were always here, doing the work, holding us up. We just never saw it. You were right. You were like a ghost. And that's the twist. The great moral dilemma that still nags at me. I fixed the system. I forced the structure of the department to change. I demanded and received the title, the pay, and the authority I deserved. But the core problem remains. Did they really learn to see me, Mike, the person, or did they only learn to fear the consequences of the invisible failure? Did they respect my expertise, or did they respect the catastrophic power I wielded? I often wonder if, 5 years from now, once the memory of the crash has faded, once I've established a new, robust system that runs flawlessly, and the company has grown comfortable again, if the invisibility will start to creep back. Will the essential, quiet labor once again be taken for granted, until the next invisible man decides to disappear? I look at my team now, working hard, respecting the process. They see me, they talk to me, they include me. But I can't shake the feeling that they aren't looking at a colleague, they're looking at the safety net that they know can be withdrawn. I got what I wanted, visibility. But the cost was a week of chaos, and the means were the weaponization of my own unappreciated competence. Was that the only way for the invisible man to finally be seen? It's a question worth pondering. Thank you for watching my story. If you've ever felt like the Mike in your own office or your own life, the essential person who is constantly overlooked, let me know in the comments. Like and subscribe if you want to hear more stories about turning overlooked effort into recognized value.